talking about the 5 stages of scaling SaaS architecture. Now, this is not about scaling a SaaS business. That would be when you're trying to get more customers and how do we get more people to pay us? That's scaling the business. This is talking about scaling the architecture. So how do you keep your web application, your SaaS, how do you keep it running in production with zero downtime when you're onboarding hundreds and thousands of people? That's what we're talking about. So first stage of scaling a SaaS is the validation stage. So at this point, speed is the key. This is where you want to use AI tools like Lovable and VO and whatever Google's putting out this week. You want to build a really, really quick MVP. It doesn't even have to work. The buttons can be simulating the functionality. It's just something that you can put in front of people to validate the idea. You put it in front of them and they either say, "What's this? Why do I care?" Or you put it in front of them and they say, "That's awesome. Can I use it today? Does it work? I want it. Take my money." So, validation stage, you just want anything you can put in front of people. It doesn't even really have to work. You build it with the intent that you'll probably throw it away and rewrite it. So if it's taking you longer than, maybe a week to come up with, you're probably doing it wrong. That's validation stage. After you've validated, and only after you've validated, that's when you want to move to the MVP stage. Now, this is the first stage in the journey where you're going to need to make a really actually critical decision for the health of your business. And that is, you do need to choose the right stack at this MVP stage. The sooner you get the stack right, the way less expensive the journey is going to be. So I did this. I had a SaaS project that I was working on. I started building it on one stack and I wound up moving it 6 months into the project over to another stack. Now, fortunately, that was something I was working on nights and weekends, not all day, every day. So 6 months in was still pre-launch. That meant that it was still a relatively not costly error, picking the wrong stack. I transitioned that one over to Laravel, never looked back because Laravel has a lot of batteries included. So I've got at the bottom there, you can see use Laravel, Django, Rails. Obviously, there's just one for each language. If you like PHP, go with Laravel. If you like Python, go with Django. If you like Ruby, go with Rails. Whatever floats your boat. I'm a PHP guy. I like Laravel. I totally recommend that. If you don't know which one to go with, pick PHP and Laravel. I will do another video on why I would pick that one. But you do need to pick the right stack at this MVP stage. Why? Because most MVPs wind up in production in some form or another. It's not that common that people build a full actual MVP with real functionality and a real stack that's not simulated, and then they don't ship it. It's not that common that they then do an actual rewrite after that. Some form of your MVP will get shipped, so make the good choices now because they're only going to be more expensive to change later. So the big thing here is avoid shiny object syndrome. You want to know what stack to pick. So this means, what database you're going to use, what backend layer, what front end layer. Don't have shiny object syndrome. I see this all the time with people who are, especially front end engineers, people who spend their life doing front end stuff and don't hang out in the back end as much. Huge shiny object syndrome. Every other day, not even every week, every day it seems like there's some new library that they have to use. They have to integrate it because it's going to change everything and it's going to be awesome and make everyone more productive. And they keep on coming. No. We don't want any of that. We want it to be vanilla and boring. Now, if you are the founder, this is something that you are going to have to manage because the team, if they're a bunch of engineers who don't have any equity and don't have a stake in how the business runs, they probably want to play with the new shiny toys. They want to have the shiny object syndrome because it's fun for them. You don't want to do that. You want boring vanilla tech. Why? Because it's easy to hire people for. It's cheap to hire people for. It's easy to replace people when they move on to other jobs, when just stuff happens. You have some employee turnover, so they're easy to replace because the knowledge is everywhere in the market. And when you come to sell your business, because eventually that's probably going to happen, are you really going to be doing this until the day that you completely retire and ride off into the sunset? And even then, are you going to just let the thing die? And you're going to sell it at some point. Whether you sell it a year from now or 40 years from now, you are going to sell it. And when you go to sell it, you will get a better price for it if the tech stack is simple and hiring for it is cheap and easy. So avoid shiny object syndrome. Don't pick the new hot library on the block. Pick the established things. that are common, that are boring, that make you seem like a basic B word. All right, next step. So once you've got your MVP, you've built something that actually is real, actually works, is using more or less the stack that you're going to use long term. Then you can move on to the startup stage. Now, in the startup stage, you want to keep it as simple as you possibly can. So startup stage is where you're getting real customers on. It's not pre-launch anymore. You've launched. There's actually people using it and paying you to use it. And at this point, the words that I want to have burned into your brain are monolithic architecture. So monolithic actually means one rock if you know some Greek. Single thing, one entity, indivisible. You want your SaaS to be a monolith. You don't want it to be a collection of 30 microservices. You want it to be one thing. You want the bits of the system that call other bits of the system to live in memory together. You don't want them to be making network calls to each other. It adds overhead, it takes more system resources, it's way more costly to run. And worst of all, it has a whole class of bugs that just don't exist in a monolith. There's these race conditions that happen because of the network latency. There's the issue of packets not getting delivered, and maybe the message just straight up never arrived between one part and another. Avoid microservices like the plague in this startup stage. You are not ready. That is not what you need to be doing. Absolutely monolithic at this point. You should be able to run the whole system on one computer. You might not do that for various reasons. You might put the database on a separate server to the web server. There are totally legitimate reasons for that, even at this early point. But you should be able to run it all on one server, or your architecture is way too complicated. So your developers, their development environment, they should be able to run the whole stack on their development machine easily. That's startup stage. Two big principles. KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. If in doubt at any point, if at any point you're tempted to add a moving part to the architecture, don't do it. You think, I'm going to have some background job queuing system. I need some other database other than the one I already have. Avoid it. Use the database you already have. Use a database table that's in there to queue the jobs until there's some positive, clear reason why it's worth having Redis or something like that. There's nothing wrong with Redis. I like Redis. I'm deploying Redis. It's very useful because I want to use Horizon from Laravel to track all my jobs and queues. When you have that actual need for it, use it. But if there's not some pressing reason, don't use something like that just because it's cool. Use the stuff you already have. That's KISS. The Yagni principle is you ain't gonna need it. Don't build for something that will be a problem when you've got 10 times as many users as you have today. You don't have the users yet. Prove that you can get them, then worry about the architecture to support them. Because what you'll find is that even when you get there, you still probably won't need the thing you thought you were going to need. It's heaps easier to scale something up than to scale something out. So vertical scaling is where you just basically buy more hardware and throw bigger computers at it. Horizontal scaling is where you do really tricky technical things and try to have, 7 computers behaving as one. You ain't gonna need it. You don't need the complexity until people are signing up to your software in such great numbers that you absolutely have to do it, or the whole thing is going to break down and everyone will churn. So, startup stage, monolithic architecture, burn it in. Don't use a microservice until you are absolutely forced to prevent people from churning. Keep it simple. Don't build anything you don't absolutely need. Okay, startup stage. Now, at some point, Lord willing, you are going to have some big wins. You are going to start moving into what I call baller territory. Now, this is where you have got at least 1,000 customers. If you don't have 1,000 customers, unless your SaaS is doing something really specialized and really compute intensive, you are probably not at baller stage. Baller is for people who are pretty much running 1,000 plus customers. If you don't have 1,000 customers, you're probably not there. This is the point where bottlenecks in your monolithic architecture start to appear. They're not show-stopping, but you're starting to notice, okay, there are some things in the system that we're starting to see peak hour traffic. We're starting to see times when a lot of the users try to do something at once and it's getting a bit slow. That's the kind of thing you see once you've got 1,000 customers and you're at the baller stage. If you're seeing those kind of symptoms and you've only got 100 customers, you've got an architecture problem. You've probably got something built in a shoddy way. That's the bad news. The good news is that it's probably very easily fixable. It's probably something dumb. It's probably just that you've got a missing index on one of the database tables that's making that table really slow to scan. The fixes for those are easy and cheap. So you want to have monolithic problems, not crazy architecture microservice problems, because monolithic problems, even though they exist, they're quick and cheap to fix. So you want to fix those. You get to this baller stage, you start to see, the same kind of bottlenecks that I'm talking about. Slow tables because of a missing index. You say, oh, okay, there was this piece of the back end that is kind of doing things inefficiently, but we just did it quick and dirty to get the feature released. We can refactor that a bit and make it more efficient. All that kind of stuff. So that's there. The baller stage is where you're noticing bottlenecks and you're making little architectural changes to overcome them as they come up. So an example would be, right, like we had 2 web servers because we just wanted to be able to have zero downtime when we did deploys. And now we're getting more and more requests. So we're going to have a few more web servers. They're stateless. All the state is in the database. It is technically horizontal scaling, but it's the shallow end of that pool. And we just kind of need it now because we're maxing out the web servers. Sure, do that kind of thing. The principle here is something called the trellis and the vine. This comes from a book that I read many, many years ago when I was working for a church. It comes from like, how do you build the church? The trellis is the thing that you stick up, it's crisscrossed wood that the vine is going to find its tangly way up. So your goal really is to grow a great big healthy vine. The goal is not to build a trellis, but you build the trellis so that the vine has something to grow on. So same thing. The idea in a church setting was, hey, what programs do we want to run? How formal do we want it to be? What staff do we want to have? None of that is the goal. The goal of having the church there is to, kind of meet the spiritual needs and preach the gospel to people and grow people in the knowledge of Jesus. I'm a Christian. It's what we do. That's the goal. The rest of it is just stuff in support of that goal. So don't let the trellis become the goal. Have it be the support. So same thing with building a SaaS. You want to build just enough architecture to support the vine at the stage of growth that it's at now. Don't build the trellis ahead any further than you have to support the place the vine is up to at this stage. So that's baller. That's a good place to be. That's, you're making money at that point. You got 1,000 plus customers. You're doing well. Don't get tempted at this stage to over-engineer. That's baller. Now, at this point, you might eventually, I hope you do, eventually reach what I'll call the Lambo stage. Now, at this point, you've probably got somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 customers or more. That's kind of the level that you got to be at to really have these kind of Lambo problems. Now, at this point, the monolithic architecture is starting to really show a ceiling. The user experience is at risk of degrading. People are going to start churning because there's actually problems that occur in the system because there are just too many people on it. If you're at the point where you're going to your infrastructure provider, you're going to Hetzner, you're going to AWS or wherever your servers are, and you're thinking, oh, gee, I need to upgrade the server. I need the next biggest size of server, and they don't have one. That's when you're at the Lambo stage. That's when you have Lambo problems. You have to horizontal scale because there is no way to vertical scale any further. When horizontal scaling is forced upon you, you've really tried hard to make your code efficient, to make sure that it's not something that can be fixed in software. The hardware has to scale, and you can't just buy bigger computers. That's Lambo level. At that point, it's typically worth getting specialists involved, getting DevOps people who know how to build a system for you that is geared for that kind of scaling. More and more, you can outsource this a bit to certain cloud providers. So, on the database side, you think people like PlanetScale, stuff like Neon. I don't know about Superbase. Superbase maybe even would do read replicas for you and this kind of thing, where you have someone else managing the database in a way that it's going to be multiple computers serving your data and looking like it's just one computer. And that's horizontal scaling. So you may be able to outsource some of that, and probably should if you can. But this is where the problems start to get specific to your application. The problems start to get a lot less generic and a lot more specific to you. That's why it starts to become worthwhile to hire specialists who are going to deal with your specific problem. So that's Lambo stage. Always the biggest mistake that I see founders and CTOs making, they try to play the Lambo game way too soon. Way too soon. Now, the reason you never ever want to do this is simple. You're going to try and sell this company someday, or you're going to try and take a loan against it, or you're going to try and do something. You want to make money off it. Who wants to buy a company? Who wants to own a company that's overpaying for their infrastructure by 5x? Nobody. Nobody wants to do that. You don't want to be that person. I've seen it tank a company. They tried to play the Lambo game. They tried to build infrastructure that was set up to support, it might have made sense if they were going to have 50,000 customers. They had 300. 300. They could have run the whole thing on someone's desktop. It probably wouldn't have been super stable. It probably would have had, downtime occasionally. But for the most part, the customers might not have even noticed. It could have been sitting in a whole cupboard on a desktop computer, and it would have been able to run it with enough resources. 300 customers is not 50,000. Don't play the Lambo game way too soon. The result of that was that company got acquired, and then the people who acquired it had to shut it down like a year later because it was just too expensive to keep it running. Terrible, terrible idea. Don't do it. Monolithic as long as you can. Avoid microservices until they are forced upon you. Keep it simple. Don't build stuff you aren't going to need. All right. That is your introduction to scaling SaaS architecture. Next video, I'm going to talk about what stack do you pick? Why do you pick the stack? Because we talked about that back in the MVP stage. Pick the right stack early. So we're going to talk about how do you pick the right stack? What is the stuff that should be in your front end, your back end, and your database? I look forward to that one. I'll see you guys next time.